She moved to the small town on a quiet afternoon when the air smelled like rain and sea salt. The bus dropped her off near the old post office where everything looked a little faded but peaceful. She carried one worn suitcase and a sense of uncertainty that she tried to hide behind a polite smile. After years of chasing stability in the city, she finally realized she needed a break from noise, pressure, and disappointment. The small town, with its cobblestone streets and slow-moving days, felt like a place where she could breathe again. She had found a room to rent above a small bakery that smelled of butter and sugar every morning. The landlady, a kind woman with silver hair and gentle eyes, gave her a warm welcome and even left a plate of fresh bread on the table. It wasn't much, but it felt like home in a way her city apartment never did. She unpacked quietly, listening to the soft sound of rain hitting the roof. For the first time in months, she wasn't surrounded by the rush of traffic or the glow of tall buildings. Instead, she was surrounded by silence, and it was both comforting and unfamiliar. The next morning, she started her first day at a little antique store near the harbor. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Howard, had offered her the job after a short interview a week earlier. The shop was filled with stories, old clocks that ticked unevenly, shelves of porcelain figures, dusty photo frames, and books that smelled of time itself. She had always liked old things. They made her wonder about the people who had owned them before, about the lives behind every scratch and mark. Mr. Howard wasn't much of a talker. He moved slowly but with purpose, and he seemed to know the history of every item in the shop. "Everything here once belonged to someone who loved it," he said once while rearranging a shelf. "That's why I can't throw anything away." She had smiled at that. She understood that kind of attachment, the kind that comes from holding on to pieces of the past because you're afraid to forget. Her main job was to clean and organize things. It wasn't difficult, but it required patience. Every day she came early, opened the windows to let in the ocean breeze, and began dusting each corner. She liked how the morning light entered through the big glass windows and landed on the antique furniture, making everything glow softly. Sometimes quiet music played on the old radio behind the counter, and for those few hours life felt simple again. One afternoon, Mr. Howard asked her to help him move some heavy boxes from the storage room at the back of the shop. The room was dimly lit and smelled of old paper and wood polish. As they shifted boxes around, her eyes landed on a large object covered by a faded white sheet in the corner. She walked closer and gently pulled the sheet away. Beneath it was an old upright piano, dark brown and slightly chipped around the edges. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers along the dusty keys. A few of them made a dull, broken sound when she pressed them. Still, something about the piano caught her attention. Maybe it was the way the light touched it or the quiet sadness it carried. "What's this doing here?" she asked. Mr. Howard looked up from the boxes and paused. "That old thing? Been here longer than you can imagine," he said softly. "No one plays it anymore. It's too damaged to sell, and I've never had the heart to throw it out." She looked at it again and smiled faintly. "It's still beautiful," she said. He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but it's been through a lot. You can clean it if you like, but don't worry about fixing it. Some things are meant to stay the way they are." She agreed and made a mental note to start cleaning it the next day. When she arrived the following morning, the sky was bright and clear. The shop was quiet, and she decided to begin her work on the piano before customers came in. She brought a soft cloth, polish, and a small brush for the intricate details. As she wiped the dust off the top, a faint mark caught her eye. Small initials carved on the side panel. The letters were faded but still visible. E+J. She smiled to herself, guessing it must have been done by two people in love a long time ago. She continued cleaning slowly, humming to herself. The piano's wood began to shine again under her careful hands. She ran her fingers over the keys, pressing one softly. It made a hollow sound, like a whisper that had waited too long to be heard. She imagined the person who used to sit there, maybe a young woman playing gentle tunes by candlelight, or perhaps a man trying to impress her with a song. The thought made her heart feel warm and a little sad. As she cleaned, she noticed that one of the keys felt stuck. When she tried to lift it, it wouldn't move. She bent closer to see if something was jammed underneath, but couldn't find anything. She left it for later and continued dusting the rest. While she worked, a couple came into the shop to look at furniture. Mr. Howard handled them while she quietly polished the piano's side. Every now and then, he glanced at her, maybe surprised by how carefully she was cleaning something most people had long forgotten. After the customers left, he came over and leaned on his cane watching her work. "You really like that old thing, don't you?" he asked. She smiled. "It feels like it has a story," she said. He chuckled softly. "Everything does. That piano probably has more stories than we'll ever know." Then, with a faraway look, he added, "It belonged to someone special once." She wanted to ask more, but his tone made her stop. Instead, she nodded quietly and continued cleaning. The rest of the day passed peacefully. When she left that evening, she found herself thinking about the piano even after reaching home. She didn't know why it mattered so much, but something about it stayed in her mind, like a song she couldn't stop hearing. The next few days went by in routine. She swept the floors, arranged the shelves, and helped customers pick small treasures to take home. But whenever she had free time, she went back to the piano. She dusted the corners, polished the legs, and even cleaned the inside carefully using a small brush. One afternoon, as she leaned closer to clean beneath the keys, she noticed a thin line along the wooden panel, like it had been sealed shut once. Curious, she pressed gently, and the wood gave a little. Something inside made a soft rattling sound. She frowned and pressed again, harder this time, until the panel shifted slightly and revealed a small hidden compartment. Her breath caught in her throat. She hesitated for a moment, then reached in carefully. Inside was a small envelope tied with a faded blue ribbon. It was covered in dust, and the paper felt fragile, like it could tear with one wrong move. She looked around. Mr. Howard was busy in the front helping a customer. She turned the envelope over. On the front, in delicate handwriting, were the words, "To my dearest Evelyn." Her fingers trembled slightly as she held it. The ink had faded and the paper was yellowed with age. She could tell it had been hidden there for many years. For a moment she didn't know what to do. Should she open it? Should she tell Mr. Howard? Maybe it was something personal. She decided to wait. Carefully, she slipped the envelope back into the compartment and closed it again, making sure it looked untouched. All day she couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was Evelyn? And why had someone hidden a letter inside a piano? That night she lay awake in bed, listening to the soft hum of the bakery downstairs. The scent of fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards. She thought about her own life, the mistakes, the loneliness, the feeling of starting over. Then she thought about the piano and the name written on that envelope. Evelyn. It sounded gentle, full of something tender. Maybe the piano belonged to her. Maybe she was the one who carved those initials. The next morning, she arrived early at the shop before Mr. Howard had even unlocked the front door. She waited outside, watching seagulls fly over the harbor. When he arrived, he smiled at her surprise. "You're here early," he said. "I just wanted to finish cleaning the piano today," she replied. He nodded and let her in. She went straight to the back room and uncovered the piano again. It looked a little brighter now after days of care. She touched the keys softly, imagining the sound it must have made long ago. Then she pressed the same stuck key again. It still didn't move. Something in her told her that the piano had secrets, not just a hidden compartment, but memories that lived inside it. It felt like a witness to someone's love, someone's sorrow, someone's promise. By the time she finished polishing the last part, Mr. Howard came to check on her. "You've made it look almost new again," he said kindly. "It's been years since anyone cared for it like that." She smiled shyly. "It's a beautiful piece. It deserves to be looked after." He studied her face for a moment, then looked at the piano. His expression softened as if he was remembering something far away. "It used to belong to my sister," he said quietly. She loved this piano more than anything. She froze, her eyes widening slightly. "Your sister?" He nodded, his voice low and filled with emotion. "Yes, her name was Evelyn." Her heart skipped. The name echoed in her mind, the same name written on the envelope she had found. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. Mr. Howard didn't seem to notice her surprise. He just stared at the piano for a while, lost in thought. Then he turned and walked back to the front of the store, leaving her alone with the piano once more. She stood there in silence, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her. Now she knew that the piano didn't just hold dust and broken keys, it held a story. And maybe in some quiet way she had just stepped into the middle of it. That night she couldn't sleep again. The sound of the sea outside her window felt like soft music. She thought about Evelyn, about the letter hidden in the piano and about the old man who still kept it after all these years. She realized she couldn't ignore it anymore. Something inside her wanted to know the truth, not out of curiosity, but because she felt connected to it somehow. The piano had been silent for decades, but maybe it was time for its story to be heard again. That night she hardly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faded blue ribbon around the old envelope, and the name written in soft, looping handwriting, "To my dearest Evelyn." The sound of the rain outside her window felt like faint music, the kind that carries memories instead of melodies. She kept wondering who had written that letter, and what kind of love story was hidden inside that piano. By morning, her curiosity had grown stronger than her hesitation. When she arrived at the shop, Mr. Howard was already there, sweeping the front steps. He gave her his usual kind smile, but she could see a tired sadness in his eyes. She thought about asking him about his sister, about the piano, about the letter, but she couldn't. Something told her it wasn't time yet. She walked to the back room where the piano stood waiting. The sunlight from the window landed gently across its polished surface. It looked almost alive now, as if it had been waiting for years for someone to touch it again. She took a deep breath, sat down on the small wooden stool, and opened the cover. For a moment, she just stared at the keys. Some were yellowed with age, others chipped at the corners. She pressed one softly, and a faint sound echoed in the empty room. It was cracked but hauntingly beautiful. She smiled a little, as if the piano had whispered back to her. Then carefully, she pressed the same key that had been stuck before. It still wouldn't move. She tilted her head, trying to see what was holding it in place. When she leaned closer, her fingers brushed against the same wooden line she had noticed before, the hidden compartment. Her heart beat faster. She hesitated for a moment, looking toward the shop door to make sure Mr. Howard wasn't nearby. Then, with careful hands, she pressed the edge of the wood until it loosened again. The small drawer slid open, just like before, revealing the envelope with the blue ribbon. She picked it up, holding it gently. It felt so fragile, like even the air could tear it. She ran her thumb along the faded ink, tracing the name Evelyn. For a long time, she just stared at it, wondering what kind of love could last long enough to leave its echo in wood and paper. Finally, she opened it. The letter inside was written in neat, flowing handwriting. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear enough to read. It began simply, "My dearest Evelyn, by the time you read this, I will already be far from here. The world is changing fast, and I must go where duty calls. But please know, there is no distance that could ever change what I feel for you. You are my song, the quiet in my storms, the reason I will come home." She stopped for a second, her breath catching. The words felt alive, as though the person who wrote them had poured his heart straight onto the page. The letter continued. "When I return, I'll bring you the piano you always dreamed of, the one by the window where you said sunlight should fall when you play. You'll teach me your favorite song, and we'll fill this house with music and laughter again. Until then, play for me, my love. Let the notes carry my heart to you, yours always, James." She read the name twice. It felt strange and beautiful at the same time. Whoever James was, he clearly loved Evelyn deeply. She imagined him sitting somewhere far away, writing this letter with trembling hands, hoping it would reach her. She folded it carefully, holding it close for a moment before placing it back in the drawer. Her heart was still racing. The piano suddenly didn't feel like just an old instrument anymore. It felt like a witness to something sacred, something that had survived through time. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps. Mr. Howard appeared in the doorway holding a cup of tea. "You've been spending a lot of time with that piano," he said with a gentle smile. She nodded quickly, trying to hide her nervousness. "It's just beautiful," she replied softly. He stared at it for a while, then sighed. "It belonged to someone I cared about very much," he said. "My sister Evelyn. She was a wonderful pianist. This piano was everything to her." The way he said her name made something inside her ache. "She must have loved music," she whispered. He nodded. She did. And there was someone she loved even more. A man named James. He went to war when they were young. She waited for him all her life. She froze. The letter, the name, it all connected. "Did he ever come back?" she asked quietly. Mr. Howard looked down at the floor, his voice turning soft. "No," he said. "At least not that we ever knew. He was listed missing, but she never stopped believing he'd return. Every day she played that piano, waiting. Even when her hands began to tremble with age, she played. Said it made her feel close to him. He smiled sadly. When she passed away, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. I thought about it many times, but I couldn't do it. It was the only piece of her left in the world. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air in the room felt heavy, filled with years of unspoken emotion. When Mr. Howard left to help a customer, she turned back to the piano. Her heart was full of questions. What happened to James? Did Evelyn ever know about this letter? Or had it stayed hidden all this time, waiting to be found? That evening, after the shop closed, she stayed behind to tidy up. Mr. Howard had gone home early, and the store was silent except for the faint ticking of an old clock. She went to the piano one last time before leaving. She opened the cover again and pressed the keys softly. The sound echoed faintly like a whisper from another world. She played random notes, not really knowing any songs, but the melody came out gentle and sad. As she played, she noticed something strange. One of the notes sounded different, hollow, almost like something was hidden beneath it. She pressed it again, harder this time. The sound repeated, faint but distinct. Her heart started beating faster. She leaned forward and peered inside the piano, near the strings. Something glinted faintly in the dim light. Reaching in carefully, she touched a small metal object. It felt like a thin key. She pulled it out and found it was indeed a tiny brass key, old and slightly rusted. She turned it over in her hand. There was a small engraving on it, the letter E. She didn't know what it opened, but she felt certain it was connected to Evelyn somehow. The next day, she showed it to Mr. Howard. His eyes widened when he saw it. "I haven't seen that key in 60 years, he said softly. "It used to open Evelyn's old music box. I thought it was lost." He went into the back room and returned with a small wooden box wrapped in a piece of cloth. It had beautiful carvings on the lid, roses and musical notes. He inserted the key and turned it gently. The box clicked open and a soft melody began to play. Inside were a few yellowed photographs and a dried flower. One photo showed a young woman sitting at the same piano, smiling, her hands resting on the keys. Beside her stood a man in uniform, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes bright and kind. Mr. Howard smiled faintly, tears filling his eyes. "That's her," he said. "And that's James. She kept this photo beside her bed until the day she died." She stared at the picture, feeling her heart twist. The faces looked so alive, so full of hope. "They look happy," she said softly. "They were," he replied, "before the war took him away." He closed the box gently and placed it on the piano. "Maybe it's time people remember them again," he murmured. That evening, after closing the shop, she couldn't resist one last look at the letter. She opened the hidden drawer and took it out again. This time, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a second, smaller folded piece of paper tucked behind it. She carefully unfolded it. It wasn't a letter this time, but a short note written in different handwriting. This one shaky, like it had been written by an older person. It read, "If someone finds this one day, please know this piano carries my heart. It holds every note I ever played for the man I loved. And though he never came home, I believe he still hears the music wherever he is. Evelyn." Tears filled her eyes before she even realized it. She pressed her hand gently on the piano surface, feeling a deep warmth spread through her chest. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn. She thought about how she had waited, how she had loved, and how she had left her heart hidden inside that piano for someone else to find. It felt almost like fate that she had been the one to clean it. When she arrived at the shop the next morning, she found Mr. Howard sitting quietly by the piano. The letter and the music box were on the table beside him. He looked up at her and smiled faintly. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we should restore this piano. Not to sell it, but to bring it back to life. It's been silent too long." She nodded immediately. "I'll help," she said. "I think it's what Evelyn would have wanted." He smiled again, and for the first time since she met him, his eyes didn't look sad. They looked peaceful. For the next few days, they worked together. They cleaned every inch of the piano, polished its wood, and replaced a few broken keys. A local craftsman came to fix the strings, and slowly the piano began to sound alive again. Each evening, when they finished, she would play a few notes. The melodies were simple, but they filled the room with warmth. And sometimes, when the sun began to set and light fell across the keys, it almost felt like Evelyn was there too, listening quietly, smiling. The old piano was no longer just furniture in a dusty shop. It had become a bridge between past and present, between love lost and love remembered. And she knew deep down that the story hidden inside it wasn't finished yet. It was only beginning to reveal itself, note by note, letter by letter, through the hands of those willing to listen. The days in the shop began to feel different after that. The air seemed lighter, and the sound of the piano being slowly brought back to life filled every corner of the old room. Every morning when she arrived, she felt a small rush of excitement to see how much closer the piano was to its full sound again. The craftsman who came to help with the restoration was an old friend of Mr. Howard's. His hands were steady and patient, and he treated the piano with quiet respect, as if he understood that it wasn't just wood and strings, it was a memory. She helped where she could, wiping away dust, holding tools, and watching every detail with care. Mr. Howard seemed to change too. He started talking more, sharing little bits of the past while they worked. She learned that he and Evelyn had grown up in a small house by the sea, not far from where the shop now stood. Their parents had passed away when they were young, and they had leaned on each other through everything. Evelyn had always been drawn to music. She could sit for hours by the window, humming songs she'd make up on the spot, dreaming about having her own piano one day. She didn't care much for fancy things, Mr. Howard said one afternoon, tightening a screw on one of the keys, but she loved the sound of music more than anything. It made her feel like she belonged somewhere. He paused for a long moment, his gaze softening. Then one day she met James. He came into town for work. He used to pass by our house every morning. One day he stopped to listen to her play on an old borrowed keyboard. That's how it started. She listened quietly, picturing the scene. Evelyn playing near the open window, the breeze carrying her music down the street, and a young man stopping in his tracks to listen. Something about the image made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. Was he kind to her? She asked. Mr. Howard smiled faintly. He was. They were young, but the kind of love they had was rare. You could see it in the way they looked at each other. Simple but strong. He didn't speak for a while after that. They continued working in silence, but she could feel the story lingering in the air, waiting to be told. Later that evening, when the craftsman packed up his tools and left, she stayed behind to tidy the place. The piano looked beautiful now, its wood glowing softly in the lamplight. She sat on the stool and pressed a few keys. The sound was still uneven, but clearer now, warmer. She opened the small compartment again and took out the letter. The words were already familiar, yet every time she read them, they stirred something new inside her. You are my song, the quiet in my storms. She closed her eyes and could almost hear the voice of the man who wrote it, soft and full of hope. Mr. Howard appeared in the doorway, watching her. You read it again, didn't you? He said kindly. She nodded, not embarrassed this time. It's beautiful, she said. It feels alive. He walked in slowly and sat beside her. She kept that letter for years, he said. I didn't know where it had gone. Maybe she hid it there herself. Maybe she wanted someone to find it one day. She looked at him. Do you think she ever stopped waiting for him? Mr. Howard shook his head. No. Evelyn wasn't the kind to stop believing. Even when everyone told her to move on, she said she could still feel him close when she played. She said love doesn't disappear, it just changes its form. They sat in silence after that, both staring at the piano. The old shop clock ticked softly in the background. The next day, while cleaning near the piano bench, she found a small stack of sheet music tucked beneath the seat. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting on it was neat and elegant. The title at the top read, The Song of Home. She showed it to Mr. Howard, and his eyes widened. That's one of her songs, he said quietly. She wrote it herself. She looked down at the notes, feeling a strange mixture of awe and sadness. It's beautiful, she whispered. He nodded. She used to play it every night before she went to bed. Said it helped her feel close to him. Something about that sentence stayed with her all day. That night, long after the shop was closed, she sat in her small rented room above the bakery and stared out the window at the ocean. The moonlight reflected off the water, and she imagined Evelyn sitting by her own window years ago, doing the same thing. She took out a small notebook and began writing down what she could remember from the letter, just the lines that moved her most. Let the notes carry my heart to you. The words were simple, but they stayed in her mind like a quiet melody. The next morning, when she arrived at the shop, she found Mr. Howard holding an old wooden box. He looked up at her with a small smile. "I thought you might like to see this," he said. Inside were black and white photographs. Evelyn in a floral dress, smiling shyly at the camera. A picture of a young man in a soldier's uniform. Another of the two of them together at what looked like a small festival. They looked happy, full of life and dreams. "She sent him letters almost every week," Mr. Howard said softly. And for a while he wrote back. "I remember how she'd sit on the porch reading his letters aloud. He used to tell her about the places he'd been, the songs he heard, how he couldn't wait to come home. Then one day, the letters stopped coming." He sighed, his voice trembling slightly. "The war ended, but he never came back. The official report said he went missing." Evelyn waited for years. She believed maybe he survived somewhere. Maybe he'd lost his memory. She held on to that hope. She looked down at the photos again. The young woman in them had a softness in her eyes, the kind that comes from believing in something bigger than fear. It made her wonder how it must feel to wait for someone who never returns, and still love them as if they might walk through the door any day. That afternoon, as she cleaned the front of the store, a thought came to her. What if the piano wasn't just a gift? She said suddenly. Mr. Howard looked up from his ledger. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. In his letter, James said he would bring her the piano when he returned. What if he sent it to her before he went missing? Maybe it was meant as a promise, even if he couldn't keep it himself. Mr. Howard's expression changed slowly as he thought about it. "You might be right," he said quietly. "The piano was delivered after the war. I remember the day it arrived." Evelyn opened the door and saw it sitting there with a note that simply said, "For our songs that never got to play." She cried for hours. "I never knew who sent it." A deep stillness filled the room. "So maybe it was him," she whispered. "Maybe that was his way of keeping his word." Mr. Howard smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. Maybe so. After that day, something inside her changed. The piano wasn't just a piece of history anymore. It was proof that love could outlive everything else. She began coming in early to play a few simple notes, even though she wasn't a trained musician. Each sound seemed to carry emotion she couldn't express with words. One afternoon, while she was playing softly, a customer entered the shop. It was an older woman who lived nearby. She stopped near the door and listened quietly, tears filling her eyes. "That song," she said in a trembling voice. "Where did you learn it?" "I found the music sheet here," she replied. "It's called The Song of Home." The woman nodded slowly. "I remember Evelyn. She used to play that song every evening. You could hear it all the way down the street." After the woman left, she felt her chest tighten with emotion. She looked at the piano again and whispered softly, "You've been waiting a long time to be heard again, haven't you?" The piano seemed to answer her with a faint echo from its strings. Over the next few weeks, more people began visiting the shop, not just to buy things, but to listen. Word spread around the town that the old piano had been restored. Some people came because they remembered Evelyn. Others just came to hear its sound. Each time she played, she felt something warm spreading through the room, as if the piano was breathing again. Mr. Howard often sat nearby, his hands folded, his eyes closed, listening. Sometimes when she played Evelyn's songs, she saw him quietly wiping his eyes. One evening after the last customer left, she turned to him and said, "Do you ever think she knows?" He looked up, puzzled. "Knows what?" "That we found her letters. That her story still lives on." He smiled faintly. "If there's any truth in what she believed, then yes. I think she knows." The shop grew quiet after that. The light from the setting sun filled the room with a golden glow. She sat at the piano one last time before locking up and played a few soft notes. The melody of the Song of Home filled the air, slow and gentle. In that moment, she didn't just imagine Evelyn waiting anymore. She imagined James somewhere, hearing that same melody and smiling. It wasn't just an old love story now. It had become something living, a reminder that even when time takes everything else away, love leaves its trace in the simplest places. An old letter, a forgotten key, a song that still plays when someone cares enough to listen. And as she closed the lid of the piano that night, she felt something peaceful settle in her heart, like a quiet promise that the story wasn't over yet. It had only just begun to speak. The town had grown quieter as winter crept in. The waves outside crashed with a colder sound, and the air in the mornings carried a faint mist that blurred the rooftops. Inside the small music shop, however, there was a warmth that never seemed to fade. The scent of polished wood and the faint hum of piano notes still lingered in the air. She had started lighting a small lamp every evening near the piano. It made the golden color of the instrument glow softly, like it was alive again after years of silence. Every time she touched the keys, it felt like touching a heartbeat from the past. One evening, as she was cleaning the counter, Mr. Howard spoke up from where he sat by the piano bench. "You've brought something back to this place," he said quietly. "For years it was just dust and memory. Now it feels alive again." She smiled gently. "Maybe it was waiting for someone to care again," she said. He looked at her for a long time and then nodded. That's exactly what Evelyn used to say about people, that everyone needs someone to care again before they start shining. They both laughed softly at that, but as the laughter faded, something thoughtful lingered between them. That night, after closing the shop, she stayed behind. She had been thinking about the letters and the old photographs they found earlier. There was something unfinished in the story, something that didn't let her rest. The piano, the love letters, the sheet music, they all told parts of the story, but not all of it. She decided to check the inside of the piano one more time. She carefully lifted the top panel and ran her fingers along the inner frame. The wood creaked softly. For a moment she thought there was nothing more to find, until she noticed a small uneven space near the back under the strings. It looked like the edge of something pressed into the wood. Her heart beat faster. She reached in carefully, her fingers brushing against a folded envelope wedged tightly between two wooden beams. It was yellowed and fragile, sealed with a bit of wax that had half cracked with age. She pulled it out gently and stared at it. The handwriting was the same, steady, careful, written with feeling. On the front it said only, "For when the music stops." She hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The paper inside was brittle but still legible. "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, I may not be beside you, but I want you to know that every song we never got to play, every note left unsung, it was never lost. It lives where love never fades. I hope this piano reminds you of that. I built part of it with my own hands, thinking of you with each piece I shaped. If life allows, I'll find my way home. And if it doesn't, I'll still be there, in the sound, in the silence, and in you." It was signed with just an initial, EJ. She sat there for a long time, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the letter. The idea that James might have helped build or restore the piano himself made everything even more powerful. It wasn't just an object he bought. It was a piece of his love, carved into the wood. Mr. Howard returned from the back room and stopped when he saw her sitting there with the letter. She looked up slowly and handed it to him. He read it in silence, his eyes glistening by the end. "I didn't know," he whispered. "All this time," she never said. He sat down, staring at the piano like it had just turned into something sacred. She must have found this after he disappeared. She never told me, but maybe she didn't need to. Maybe she kept it inside because it was hers alone. She felt tears rising but blinked them away. "He must have loved her deeply," she said softly. "To build something that could hold his words even when he couldn't be here." Mr. Howard nodded slowly. He did, and she never stopped loving him even when her hair turned gray and her hands could barely play. She said love was like a song that keeps playing inside you even when the room is silent. The next few days were filled with quiet work and thoughtful silence. The piano became the center of everything. People from the neighborhood started visiting more often, drawn by the sound of music that seemed to tell a story all by itself. One afternoon, an old man walked in, leaning on a cane. He stood near the piano for a long moment listening. Then he said, "I remember this tune. My mother used to hum it when I was a boy." Mr. Howard looked up. "You knew Evelyn?" The man nodded. Everyone in this town knew her music. She played at the church sometimes. There was always something sad and beautiful in her songs. After the man left, she sat for a long time, wondering how many lives Evelyn had quietly touched through her music. That evening, as the sky turned orange over the sea, she decided to do something she had been thinking about for weeks. She took the piano cover off completely, polished every inch of it, and placed the letters and the photographs in a small display box on top. Then she put up a small handwritten note beside it. This piano belonged to Evelyn, a woman who believed that love could live in music. It was built by the man she loved, and their story lives in its sound. When Mr. Howard saw it the next morning, he didn't say anything at first. He simply stood there, staring at it, and then he whispered, "She would have liked this." As days passed, more and more people came to the shop just to see the piano. Some brought flowers, others left small notes saying how the story had touched them. One woman even brought her daughter and told her, "Listen to this piano. It holds real love inside it." Every evening she played softly for whoever was there, and not full songs, just gentle melodies. And every time she played, she felt something deep in her chest, as though Evelyn's voice whispered through the keys. Then one morning, while dusting near the display, she found a small newspaper clipping tucked behind the photo frame. It was old, folded carefully. The headline read, "Local carpenter missing after returning from war." She looked closer. There was a small photograph, a young man with kind eyes and a calm smile. It was James. The article said he had last been seen traveling by train to their town after the war ended. A storm had caused a derailment on the route and several passengers were never found. She held the clipping in her hands, her breath catching. So that was what happened. He had been on his way home, keeping his promise, bringing her the piano he'd built for her. When she showed it to Mr. Howard, he stared at it for a long time. His hands shook slightly as he said, "He never made it home." But the piano did. Maybe that was his way of finding her after all. They both sat in silence. Outside, the waves crashed softly against the shore, and a faint wind rustled through the door crack. Later that night, she stayed behind again, unable to sleep. She lit the small lamp and sat at the piano. The light fell across the polished wood and the letters. She touched the keys gently and began to play the Song of Home. The sound was soft, full of emotion. As she played, she imagined Evelyn sitting beside her, smiling through tears, and James somewhere in the distance, hearing the melody he once promised to bring home. Her eyes filled with tears, but there was peace in them. It wasn't a sad feeling. It was full of gratitude, like the ending of a story that had finally found its missing piece. In the following days, something magical happened. A few young people who came to the shop started asking if they could learn to play. They said they wanted to feel what Evelyn must have felt when she wrote her music. Mr. Howard agreed to give small lessons, and soon the shop was filled with sound again, laughter, chords, and the echo of new beginnings. Sometimes she'd stand by the door listening, thinking about how love from decades ago had somehow created new joy in the present. It was strange and beautiful how one person's faith could ripple through time like that. One evening, while closing up, she noticed something she hadn't before. A small engraving carved faintly inside the lid of the piano, almost hidden by the wood grain. She leaned closer to read it. It said, "For all our songs that never end." She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "They never ended," she whispered softly. "They just changed hands." That night, she walked home under the stars, the sound of the ocean following her. For the first time, she realized that this story, Evelyn's and James's, wasn't just about love lost. It was about the kind of love that creates something lasting, something that touches hearts long after the people are gone. And as she reached her door, she looked back toward the shop and thought about how strange it was. She had only been asked to clean an old piano. Yet in doing that, she had uncovered an entire world of love, faith, and hope. What started as a small task had turned into something that changed her view of life. She learned that sometimes the simplest things, an old piano, a forgotten letter, a faded song, could hold the deepest stories. She didn't know why she had found it or why now after all these years, but she knew one thing for sure. She would keep that piano alive. She would make sure people remembered Evelyn and James not just for their love, but for the way they kept believing in something pure and timeless. And as the moonlight touched the window that night, she whispered to the quiet air, "Thank you for letting me find you both." The days after the discovery of the newspaper clipping felt both heavy and comforting. It was as if the air inside the shop had changed, quieter yet warmer somehow. She felt like she was living inside someone's memory, carrying pieces of a love story that refused to fade with time. Every morning she unlocked the shop, the bell chiming softly above the door. The piano sat in its place, glowing faintly in the morning light as if the sun itself had decided to visit Evelyn's music before anyone else. She would touch the edge of the instrument gently, like greeting an old friend. Mr. Howard had started sitting near the piano more often. Sometimes he'd open the small box of letters and read one quietly to himself. Other times he'd tell her stories about how Evelyn used to hum when she cooked, or how she'd stop halfway through a song just to laugh at something silly. It was strange. The more they talked about her, the more it felt like she was still there with them. One afternoon, a little boy came into the shop with his grandmother. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and his curious eyes went straight to the piano. "Can I touch it?" he asked shyly. She smiled. "Of course. Just be gentle." He pressed one of the white keys and giggled when it made a soft note. His grandmother smiled too, tears forming in her eyes. "I remember this piano," the older woman said. "I played it when I was your age. Miss Evelyn taught me one song. That day the boy and his grandmother stayed for an hour. She played a few notes while the boy watched, his small hands hovering above the keys. When they left, they promised to come again next week." After they were gone, she turned to Mr. Howard. "It feels like the piano is bringing people back together," she said softly. He nodded slowly. "That's what music does. It reminds people of what they've lost and what they still have." Something about that sentence stayed with her. At night, when the world outside was quiet and the only sound was the ticking clock above the counter, she would sit by the piano and think about her own life, about the job she lost, the relationships that faded, the dreams that once felt close but slipped away. There was a time when she thought love was something that either stayed or vanished forever. But now, sitting by this piano, she realized love wasn't something that ended. It changed shape, just like a song that moves from one instrument to another. One evening, as she was closing the shop, she noticed an envelope slipped under the front door. It had no name on it. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "I came to the shop last week. The story about the piano reminded me of my husband. We met during the war, too. He used to play the same melody Miss Evelyn wrote. Thank you for keeping her story alive. Some of us need to be reminded that love doesn't die. It waits." She folded the note carefully and placed it next to the letters. Her eyes filled with quiet tears. Every time she thought the story had given all it could, something new arrived, a sign that it was still living, still touching people in ways she couldn't explain. Soon after, Mr. Howard began talking about something that surprised her. "I've been thinking," he said one morning, "maybe this piano doesn't belong just to me anymore. Maybe it belongs to everyone who still believes in love." She looked at him, unsure what he meant. He smiled faintly. "I want to give it a new home. Somewhere people can see it, play it, and remember Evelyn. Somewhere it can keep spreading her music." The thought of the piano leaving the shop made her chest tighten. It had become part of her days, her comfort, her routine. "Where would it go?" she asked quietly. "The town library," he said. "They have that open hall where they hold community events. It would be perfect there." She nodded slowly, though her heart felt heavy, but she understood. The piano was never meant to stay hidden again. That week, she helped Mr. Howard write a letter to the library committee, explaining everything, the story, the letters, the meaning behind the piano. They agreed almost immediately. The story had already spread through town. People wanted to see the piano for themselves. The day they moved it, the shop felt strangely empty. The space where the piano had stood now looked bare, like something vital was missing. But she reminded herself that it wasn't gone. It had simply found a larger stage. At the library, they placed it by the big window where sunlight poured in during the afternoons. The air smelled of books and paper, but when she ran her fingers across the piano's keys, it still sounded like home. A small ceremony was planned for the weekend. Word spread quickly, and people from all around came to see it. Families, old neighbors, and even strangers who had only heard the story secondhand. On the day of the event, she stood quietly by the side as Mr. Howard spoke. His voice shook a little, but there was pride in it. He talked about his sister, about the man she loved, and about how their story was never truly lost. Then he gestured for her to come forward. "She's the reason this story came back to life," he said, smiling toward her. "If she hadn't cared enough to clean an old piano, we might never have found any of this." People clapped softly, and she felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't done it for praise. She had simply followed her heart. Still, the kindness in their faces made her eyes sting. When the applause faded, someone called out from the crowd, "Play something for us." She froze for a second. Her hands trembled slightly, but then she nodded. She sat down at the piano bench, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play the song she had learned from Evelyn's sheet music. The melody filled the room, soft and slow, carrying the weight of love and time. The sound floated up toward the high ceiling and then settled gently over the crowd like a warm blanket. Some people cried quietly. Others smiled, lost in their own memories. When the final note faded, the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then the applause came, not loud or wild, but full of feeling. She turned slightly toward Mr. Howard and saw him wiping his eyes. After everyone had gone, the two of them stayed behind. The library lights were dim and the room felt peaceful. Mr. Howard rested his hand on the piano. "It sounds like her again," he said softly. She smiled. "Maybe she's finally home." They stood there quietly, listening to the faint echo of the last note. In the weeks that followed, people continued visiting the piano. Some played short tunes, others just touched the keys gently before leaving flowers beside it. The library placed a small plaque on the wall. Evelyn's song, a piano built from love played by hearts that remember. Every time she visited, she felt a strange peace settle over her. She had come to this town lost and uncertain, looking for work and direction. But somehow through this old piano she had found both purpose and something deeper, a quiet faith in connection, in kindness and love that lingers even when life moves on. One evening, she stayed late after everyone had left. The moonlight shone through the big window, painting silver lines across the piano. She sat down and played again, not Evelyn's song this time, but one of her own. A tune she had written in her mind for weeks but never dared to try. It was soft, hopeful, full of the feeling of finding something precious when you least expect it. As the notes filled the quiet hall, she felt a tear roll down her cheek. But it wasn't a sad tear. It was the kind that comes when your heart finally understands something important, that love isn't always loud or perfect, or even returned the way you expect. Sometimes it just exists quietly, shaping the world long after the people are gone. When she stopped playing, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Evelyn, and thank you, James." Outside, the sea breeze rustled the trees, as if the world itself was answering back. She stood up, took one last look at the piano, and smiled. For the first time in years, her heart felt light, not because everything made sense, but because she had learned to let it be. As she walked home that night under the stars, she thought about all the people who had come through the shop, who had touched the piano, who had felt something stir inside them because of it. She realized the story wasn't just Evelyn's anymore. It had become part of everyone who believed in love. Quiet, steady, unending love, and maybe, she thought, that was the real hidden message inside the piano. That every act of care, no matter how small, can keep love alive. The months after the piano was moved to the library brought quiet change to her life. She didn't notice it all at once, but slowly she started to feel lighter, as if some invisible weight she had carried for years had quietly slipped away. She still worked part-time at the shop, still greeted the regular customers, and still found comfort in the smell of wood polish and the faint chime of the doorbell. But there was something new in her now, a calmness that came from understanding something deeply human, that love, in its truest form, never really disappears. She thought about that for a long time after he left. Maybe this was her moment. In the weeks that followed, the charity gala performance began to spread online. Someone had recorded her playing and the video had gone viral. It wasn't flashy. Just a young woman sitting at a piano in a simple dress, her eyes closed, her hands moving gracefully over the keys. But people could feel it. The emotion in her music reached millions of hearts. Messages started pouring in from strangers all over the world. Some said her music reminded them of loved ones they had lost. Others said it gave them courage. Some just thanked her for reminding them that beauty still existed in small, quiet moments. She read every message she could, often wiping away tears. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. One day she received another call, this time from a well-known music foundation. They offered her a scholarship to study piano again, all expenses paid. When she heard the words, she couldn't speak. For a moment, all she could do was hold the phone and cry quietly. She went to the restaurant that evening to give her notice. The manager didn't seem surprised. "I knew this day would come," he said with a kind smile. "Go chase your dream. You've served enough tables. Now serve your gift." The staff hugged her, some even tearing up. They had seen her come in every day, tired but kind, never complaining. Watching her finally get what she deserved filled them with pride. A week later, she boarded a train with nothing but a small suitcase and a folder of sheet music. She stared out the window as the city blurred past, her heart full of gratitude and a little fear. But for once, it was the good kind of fear, the kind that comes before something beautiful. When she arrived at the Music Institute, she was welcomed warmly. Her story had already reached there before she did. Everyone knew about the waitress who played a song that silenced a billionaire. Her first few days were strange. It had been years since she'd sat in a classroom, surrounded by students younger than her, all full of dreams. But once she touched the piano again, everything felt right. Her fingers moved naturally, as if they had just been waiting for this moment. She practiced for hours each day, pouring everything she had into her music. She wasn't trying to be famous. She just wanted to play, to keep that promise she had made to her father, to never let the music die. Meanwhile, back in the city, the billionaire followed her progress quietly. He read every article that mentioned her, watched every interview. He didn't reach out often, but once in a while, he sent short notes through her manager, a few words of encouragement, nothing more. Months later, she was invited to perform again, this time at a large concert hall. It would be her first public performance since the gala, and the audience would be huge. She was nervous but also ready. The night of the concert, she stepped onto the stage wearing a simple white dress. The lights were warm, the crowd silent. She looked out and, for a moment, thought of the restaurant, the dim lighting, the quiet tables, the man who had asked her to play without knowing what it would lead to. When she sat down and began to play, the sound filled the hall. It was the same song, the one she had written for her father, but this time it sounded new. It carried not only sorrow but peace, not only loss but love. It told her whole story, from the girl who served tables to the woman who found her place again. In the audience, the billionaire watched quietly. No one knew he was there. As the final note faded, he stood and clapped, not because she was famous now, but because he was proud. After the concert, she found a small note waiting backstage. It wasn't signed, but she knew who it was from. It said, "You reminded me that money can't buy the things that matter most. Thank you for teaching me that." She smiled as she read it. Then she folded the note carefully and placed it inside her piano book, next to her father's picture. Years later, she continued to play all over the world. Her performances were known for their emotion. People said they could feel her heart in every note. But no matter how far she went, she never forgot where it all began. Sometimes she would visit the restaurant on quiet afternoons. It had changed a little, but the old piano still stood in the corner. The staff would greet her warmly, offering her tea and stories about new customers. Once, when no one was around, she sat at that same piano again. Her fingers brushed the keys gently and she smiled. The same soft melody drifted through the air, the song that had changed everything. She closed her eyes and played, not for fame, not for applause, but for herself, and for her father who had taught her that music wasn't about perfection, it was about feeling. When she finished, she sat there for a while, listening to the faint echo of the last note. Outside, the evening sun cast golden light through the windows, and she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. That night, as she walked home, she passed by a street performer playing a small, out-of-tune piano. The man looked tired, his clothes worn, but he played with passion. She stopped and listened, smiling softly. When he finished, she placed some money in his jar and said, "Don't stop playing. You never know who might be listening." He smiled back, not realizing he was speaking to someone whose music had touched millions. But she didn't tell him. She didn't need to, because for her, music had never been about recognition. It was about connection. It was about reminding people that no matter how dark life feels, one honest song can still light up a whole room. And somewhere, she hoped, her father was listening too. As the night wind carried the faint sound of music through the streets, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "I did it, Dad." Then she smiled and kept walking, not away from her past, but toward a future filled with the music she had once thought she'd lost forever.